Leadership can be defined as someone who creates an inspiring vision for the future. Landmark reform laws and welfare programs marked President Lyndon Baines Johnson's administration. President Johnson held the belief of standing for justice in the United States, claiming that he had all the strength and drive to make a change in the country. Stonewall, Texas, August 27, 1908. In a small farmhouse on the Pedernales River, Lyndon Baines Johnson was born. By the time Johnson started the first grade, he and his 4 siblings moved to Johnson City, Texas. At the age of 15, he was the youngest member of the graduating class of 1924 at Johnson City High School. After receiving his diploma, Johnson made his way to California and worked as a grape picker to support himself. A year later, with a $75 loan, he enrolled in Southwest Texas State Teachers College, now known as Texas State University. During his time in college, Johnson worked as a janitor, an office aide, and probably the job that was most influential on his future political career, a teacher in a small Mexican-American school in the South Texas town of Cotulla.
My first job after college was as a teacher in Cotulla, Texas, in a small Mexican-American school. Few of them could speak English, and I couldn't speak much Spanish. My students were poor, and they often came to class without breakfast, hungry. And they knew, even in their youth, the pain of prejudice. They never seemed to know why people disliked them, but they knew it was so, because I saw it in their eyes. I often walked home late in the afternoon after the classes were finished, wishing there was more that I could do. But all I knew was to teach them the little that I knew, hoping that it might help them against the hardships that lay ahead. And somehow you never forget what poverty and hatred can do when you see its scars on the hopeful face of a young child. I never thought then, in 1928, that I would be standing here in 1965. It never even occurred to me in my fondest dreams that I might have the chance to help the sons and daughters of those students and to help people like them all over this country.
Johnson's first-hand experience with the effects of poverty set the stage for his controversial leadership skills. He had a need to be the best, to outdo everybody, to surpass all of his predecessors in the White House, become the greatest president in American history. Throughout his life, he identified with the poor, which helped him emphasize once in Congress. He was able to relate to the poor and the wealthy and learn how to reach party lines to achieve his goals. Johnson was nominated for President of the United States at the Democratic National Convention by his good friend, the Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn. Having received 409 votes, he became the nominee for Vice President. On October 8th of 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected the 35th President of the United States, with Johnson selected as his Vice President. The Kennedy-Johnson ticket defeated the ticket of Richard Nixon in one of the closest elections in American history. Johnson spent the majority of his career as a typical politician, making deals and exchanging favors in liberal amounts. He was devious and conniving, probing and exploiting the weaknesses of his fellow members of Congress.
Oh, Lyndon Johnson, he was one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. He was cunning. It was kind of like being an animal in the jungle. He didn't read, he wasn't a scholar, but he just was so clever and so aware of people and what they did and so able to analyze them. And then he had this kind of volcanic personality, up and down. He was on certain days a little nuts.
He had a ego problem as big as his own hat. He felt inferior dealing with all these Ivy League people, and he occasionally overreacted to that and pushed these people around just to prove he could do it.
Johnson was renowned for his dominant yet sometimes sharp personality. At 6'4", he used his massive commanding physical size and intimidating personality to emphasize his point and aggressively coerce powerful politicians to advance legislation. This quickly became known as the Johnson treatment. He quickly earned respect as an intelligent and diligent legislator. He introduced a series of new reforms to build a great society for all Americans. His legislative agenda created Medicaid and Medicare, which provided federal health insurance for elderly and the poor. On November 22, 1963, Johnson became the 36th President of the United States following the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. He was sworn in aboard Air Force One at 2:38 p.m. While the United States was recovering from the loss of Kennedy, Johnson used it to his advantage. The shock of Kennedy's assassination set the stage for Johnson to complete Kennedy's unfinished New Frontier.
The greatest leader of our time has been struck down.
He used the nation's grief to pass the first Civil Rights Bill. On July 2, 1964, President Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act, the first effective civil rights law since Reconstruction, outlawing segregation and discrimination throughout American society, guaranteeing freedoms and rights for all Americans. In 1964, with Hubert Humphrey as his running mate, Johnson won the presidency outright against his Republican challenger Barry Goldwater, garnering 61% of the vote and the widest popular margin in American history, more than 15 million votes.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
On January 2nd, Johnson took the oath of office as President of the United States. The Great Society program became the agenda for Congress: aid to education, protection of civil rights, urban renewal, Medicare, conservation, beautification, control and prevention of crime and delinquency, promotion of the arts, and consumer protection. Johnson's foreign policy rested on four principles: deterring and resisting aggression, promoting economic and social progress, encouraging cooperation among nations of the same region, and seeking reconciliation with the communist world. Once Johnson ascended to the highest office in the nation, he seemed to undergo a sort of transformation, which turned him into a visionary of the future. Kouzes and Posner's ideas of inspire a shared vision and challenge of the process can be seen in President Johnson's leadership style.
He was just insatiable about being a great politician. He wanted to be the greatest president in the country's history.
In Module 4, Inspired a Shared Vision, Kouzes and Posner say, pioneering leadership relies on a compass and a dream, and look forward to the future, holding in their minds visions and ideas of what can be. This facet can be seen in Johnson's progressive legislative agenda. It was Johnson who first fought poverty in the United States after his personal experiences with the underprivileged. He focused much of his domestic policy on bettering the lives of the less fortunate through health care and education reform. Johnson believed that by educating the lower members of society, they would eventually become tax-paying citizens, contributing back to the economy. Johnson envisioned this future for the United States with his persuasive nature and was able to accomplish this goal. His administration passed more than 60 education bills, initiated a wide-scale fight against poverty, saw federal support of the arts and humanities, championed urban renewal, environmental beautification and conservation, enabled development of depressed regions, and pushed for control and prevention of crime and delinquency. Millions of elderly people were also given the means for proper medical care through the 1965 Medicare Amendment to the Social Security Act. As chairman of the Senate Preparedness Investigating Subcommittee, he began hearings on the American space program following the launch of the Russian satellite Sputnik on October 4, 1957. Johnson guided the passage of the first space legislation, the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958. President Eisenhower designated him to present a U.S. resolution to the United Nations calling for the peaceful exploration of outer space. Under Johnson as president, the U.S. also made impressive gains in its space program, which he had championed since its start. When 3 American astronauts successfully orbited the moon on Apollo 8 in December 1968, becoming the first men to ever leave the Earth's orbit, Johnson congratulated them. "You've taken, all of us, out over the world, into a new era." The mission set the stage for Apollo 11, 7 months later, which saw a man walk on the moon for the first time.
You do have to be rather careful to keep track of where you're